Good morning from Bear Country, California. I'm Dr. Caroline Heldman, and here are your headlines for the last week of September 2021, if you can believe that's where we are. First up, Donald Trump is suing his niece, Mary Trump, and the New York Times over leaked tax documents. If you recall, a couple of years ago, it was revealed through these tax documents that Donald Trump managed to avoid paying any federal taxes for 18 years. So the lawsuit against the New York Times is just completely frivolous because Donald Trump is not claiming that there was anything inaccurate in the article. It's also likely frivolous against Mary Trump. I've looked at the court filing, and nowhere does it say what part of the agreement she violated. And so these look to be Trump frivolous lawsuits that he files all the time in order to distract from things. So what is he trying to distract us from? Well, that's the second big headline. A new book called Peril from Bob Woodward and Robert Costa shows that the Trump coup was very real, more real than we had realized, and that it hasn't passed. So what are we learning in the book? We're learning that Trump had a 6-point plan to overturn the election based upon the legal rantings of John Eastman, an attorney, and that he planned to implement this plan on January 6th, the day of the violent insurrection, and he was putting a lot of pressure on Mike Pence to do so. We also know that Trump's own campaign staff knew that he was making these outlandish claims of fraud. They knew they were fraudulent, and they did nothing to stop his dangerous allegations. A number of folks have come out and said, look, we advised Mike Pence that he actually couldn't overthrow free and fair elections. But these new documents are very troubling. They show that Donald Trump was dead set on overturning the election using a legal strategy on January 6th. Perhaps the violent insurrection that he inspired interrupted his plans. It's not clear. I'm sure that as time moves on, history will unfold further for us. The third big headline, the Biden administration has been absolutely shameful in its treatment of Haitian immigrants, migrants at the border. Somewhere between 15 and 35,000 Haitian immigrants have made their way to the International Bridge in Del Rio, Texas. And the Biden administration is doing a couple of things. First, they're applying Title 42, which is this COVID rule that Trump put into place in order to override asylum procedures. So even though the U.S. has a legal obligation, according to our own laws, to consider asylum applications, if people believe they're being persecuted in their home countries and will be based upon identity if they return, just simply overriding that and saying, hey, it's a COVID rule, we're just going to deport you or expel you. So the first thing the Biden administration is doing is it's putting Haitian migrants on planes, lying to them, saying, for many of them, reporting that they're going to Miami or Florida, but actually putting them on planes back to Port-au-Prince and another city in Haiti. For others, they're putting them on buses and sending them to different cities in Texas to be processed. It's not clear how those decisions are being made, but it appears that it's families who are being allowed to stay and Haitian men, single men who are being sent back. Again, not clear, but that application of Title 42 is pretty biased. It's not being used in the same way on Latinx immigrants, on Afghan refugees, obviously. Another way in which the Biden administration is mishandling this and being inhumane in this situation is that they are pointing the big bad finger at Border Patrol because these images have surfaced, these horrific images have surfaced of Border Patrol on horseback using their reins or split reins to scare and their horses to push migrants back onto the Mexican side. There are photos of babies with, terror in their faces with horses in front of them. It's totally inhumane, and yet the Biden administration, Mayorkas, gave the order, right? They said, keep them in Mexico. Now, for this particular part of the border, vehicles cannot get in. And so, of course, horses were sent. They should have known that. They may not have known that, but they should have known that. They should have known that it would produce images reminiscent of the fugitive slave patrols. Also, it should be a moment to pause and reconsider whether or not this is a humane way to be managing migrants, period. If you can't get vehicles in, what are we doing on horseback? I mean, that's just, how is this how the United States functions and operates? So the Biden administration, I'm sure, is very worried about a massive surge in Haitian migration. A decade ago, a massive earthquake devastated Haiti, as you may recall. The country has not been rebuilt, so economic inequality and squalid conditions are still part of everyday life for many Haitians. Also, more recently, there was an earthquake in August. There was an assassination of their president in July. So there's a lot of economic and political instability in the region, and I get why the Biden administration is worried about a surge. But at the end of the day, we are a country of immigrants. We can manage this. We are a massive country that is well-resourced. So if the Democrats control Congress and the White House, why aren't we approaching this in a humanitarian fashion? We are a country that attracts the best and brightest from all over the world, and some other folks, surely. But the best and brightest come here because they want a better life. And the United States is a better country because of it. Unless you're indigenous, everyone here comes from a family that at some point immigrated to the United States. So the Biden administration needs to step up and do the right thing in this moment and stop laying blame at the hands of Border Patrol when they gave the command to do that. Also, another kind of depressing topic, the police reform, the bipartisan police reform talks over the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act have collapsed, according to Cory Booker, who's leading the efforts for the Democrats. At the end of the day, police unions and Republicans stood firmly against restrictions on police use of deadly force, on the creation of a national database to track police misconduct, and the idea that we would get rid of this immunity that shields police officers from being sued when they engage in violent behavior against civilians. Just a quick point of note here, if you are opposed to gathering data on brutality, police brutality against citizens, you're on the wrong side of history. If you're standing in the way of just gathering data, you're on the wrong side of history. Also, what this means is that the massive increase and surge in attention paid to anti-Blackness in the United States and police brutality that peaked in 2020 with the Black Lives Matter movement becoming the largest sustained protests in global history in the United States and around the globe. It means that the political capital from that surge has been spent. It means that that peak with Black Lives Matter effectively raised awareness, which is the first step in a successful, effective social movement peak, but it failed on the second count, which was translating that political capital into mechanisms of accountability. This is not surprising. 250 years of anti-Blackness baked into our founding document, our Constitution, baked into our institutions, into our cultural practices and beliefs, baked into our laws. It is not surprising that this failed, and I think if we really want to make change around anti-Blackness, we'll have to go to the root, not just address the outcomes or the symptoms of that. We need to have a national reckoning about how anti-Blackness is very much a part of the American tradition. This is us. This is what we look like. Last big headline: the media fascination with the disappearance and death of Gabby Petito. Interesting headline: mystery looks like racism to some Native Americans. No, it looks like racism to a lot of Americans, not just Native Americans. It looks like racism to a lot of people who study this, media scholars, for example, who look at the disparities in how thin, white, attractive women are covered when they disappear versus Black women versus Indigenous women versus Latinx women versus other women of color. We call this missing white women syndrome. And I in no way mean any disrespect to Gabby Petito or her memory or her family, but in the place she disappeared, in Wyoming, the data is really overwhelming. In the last 10 years, 710 Indigenous people were reported missing, right? In the past decade, 710. We didn't hear about any of them in national news coverage. There are stark disparities when a white woman disappears, but especially a thin, white, attractive, young, blonde woman disappears. She tends to get a lot of attention. and these other women are simply erased. Why? Because we care more about the pain and suffering of some women than others. Bottom line. How do we address this? Well, again, this media coverage and missing folks' disappearance and missing women's disappearance is simply a symptom of a larger, more fundamental problem, which is that some people matter more than others in our society. We know that that this varies, that value varies depending upon your gender, depending upon your race, depending upon your sexuality or LGBTQIA plus status, depending upon whether or not you are disabled or not, depending upon your age, depending upon your body size, depending upon your social class, and multiple intersections of those identities, overlapping systems of oppression. So what do we do about this? Well, I will tell you, we will not truly be a democracy until our laws are applied to everyone equally, and that means we value people equally. We value their bodies and who they are and what they bring to society and their work equally. When we no longer organize our society in terms of racial hierarchies, when gender is no longer an organizing tool for how we view our world and all of these other identities, that's when we know we will truly be liberated, we will truly be free, we will truly have the democracy that we aspire to have. As you head out into your world, please be gentle with yourself, be kind to others, and rock on.